Okay, so the last couple sections have been a total whirlwind. Let's take a minute, step back, and review what we've discussed one more time, and then continue on. So first off, a couple bullet points of review. Most important thing that I want you to take away from this entire tutorial is that Redux is in charge of managing our application state, and that state is a single plain JavaScript object. I do want to point out that our application state is completely different than a component state. So our components can still say stuff like, this dot state dot whatever, and we can still do this dot set state something 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 something, right? Our component state is completely different, completely separate from our application state. There's absolutely no tie whatsoever. And in reality, we could have very easily, well, not you and I per se, but the creators of Redux could have easily called it something totally different, not state at all, just to distinguish the two, because they are not connected in any way, shape, or form. The next thing I want to cover is our reducers. Remember, our application state is formed by our reducers. Our reducers all get tied together with this combine reducers method inside of our reducers index file right here. For each key in our combine reducers object, we assign one reducer. And that reducer is responsible for creating this piece of state. So whatever active book reducer returns will be available as our active book piece of application state. Third thing I want to cover one more time is that our reducers are in charge of manipulating, or changing our application state over time. And they do that through the use of actions. So whenever an action is dispatched, it flows through all of the different reducers in our application. And each reducer has the option to return a different piece of state than usual, based on the type of action that was received. In the next section, we're going to do a much more, I would say, real-life example with reducers, where we're not just returning a payload off an object. We're going to actually start manipulating state in more complex ways, shapes, and forms. Finally, we covered actions and action creators. Action creators are just simple functions that return an action, and an action is just a plain JavaScript object. Actions must always have a type defined, and they can optionally have a payload or any other number of properties. But in general, we tend to call this payload whenever we pass a piece of data along with the action. It's just convention. There's no requirement in Redux, it's just convention. Okay, so that's all the kind of the individual pieces. With that in mind, I want to go over just one last time our diagram here and how our application actually worked. So we tied an action creator to our book buttons over here, the book list items. Whenever a user clicked on a book list item, it called an action creator, which dispatched our action. That action was automatically sent to all of our different reducers, and for the reducers that cared about that particular action, in this case, say book selected, they returned a piece of state which is assembled as the global application state, and that global application state was then injected back into all the different containers inside of our application. The containers then re-rendered and caused the view to update. So that's really the big cycle, the cycle that our Redux app goes through. As long as you understand this cycle, and even if you don't right now, don't sweat it. Don't take that as a negative comment or anything. You will over time. As long as you get a grasp on this cycle, you absolutely 100% will understand Redux. It's really difficult to wrap your head around the first time, but once you get it, you're going to look back and say to yourself, wow, this is actually pretty simple. And that's why you see a lot of posts online and a lot of blog posts where people say, oh yeah, Redux, it's so simple. Well, yeah, it's simple, but only simple once you actually understand what's going on. It's very challenging, without a doubt, to understand what's going on. But once you understand it, it's simple to understand. Whatever, one of those funny things like that, right? I don't know. Anyways, this has been our first application. I hope you enjoyed it. In the next section, we're going to start on a little bit more complicated application that starts to mirror a little bit more real-life circumstances. And after that, we're going to start to dive into even more complex applications, so I hope you stick around.